Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping back to 1938, to a single night of absolute mass hysteria, all sparked by a radio broadcast. Now, this wasn't just some forgotten event. It was such a big deal that it led to this incredible 1940 study, part of the Princeton Radio Project, and actually funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. A social psychologist named Hadley Cantril wanted to figure out one thing. How in the world did Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast make thousands of Americans believe they were literally being invaded?
You know, on the night before Halloween in 1938, this line, it wasn't a joke. This was the actual terrified thought of a woman in Newark who, like so many other Americans, was absolutely convinced the world was ending. She thought Martians, or maybe even Germans, were invading, and yeah, this chicken was going to be her last meal.
1.2 million, and that's the conservative estimate of how many people were genuinely, deeply frightened, thinking a Martian invasion was actually happening. The entire country was just seized by this sudden, intense terror. So the big question is, right, how did a simple radio play, just an adaptation of a science fiction novel, trigger a full-blown national panic?
All right, so to really get a feel for the scale of this thing, Cantril's study, it doesn't kick off with charts and graphs. No, it starts with people. His team went out and captured these raw, unfiltered stories of terror from that night. And trust me, what they heard is just incredible.
I mean, look at this. The reactions were just instantaneous. People were packing their cars, making these frantic last calls home to their families. One guy even spent his life savings on a bus ticket to get out of town. This wasn't just some mild concern. People were desperate, trying to survive what they truly believed was the end. So to figure out why this happened, we've got to first look at what they were listening to.
Okay, so the real genius, or, the real danger of this broadcast wasn't the Martian story itself. It was how it was built. Orson Welles and his crew, they didn't just tell a story. They created this perfect illusion of reality, something that was designed to sound completely 100% real.
So check out how they layered this. First, you've got something totally normal, dance music from an orchestra. Then, bam, an interruption, a special bulletin. Now, people were used to this because of all the news coming out of Europe at the time. Next, they bring on an expert, right? A noted astronomer from Princeton, which adds this layer of authority. And finally, they drop you right into the chaos with a live reporter on the scene. It was like they were slowly, step by step, just chipping away at anyone's ability to doubt what they were hearing.
And this is exactly what Cantril's analysis points to. The broadcast basically weaponized the trust that people had in radio. I mean, radio was the source for breaking news. It used these authority figures, generals, scientists. It mentioned real towns, real highways to make it feel super local. And maybe the most brilliant part? The announcers sounded just as confused and scared as the listeners were starting to feel. It really was less of a story and more of a psychological trap.
But here's the thing, right? Millions of people were listening. Why didn't everyone panic? What was the difference? Well, Cantril's research team dug into all the data, and they found one single, crucial factor that separated the people who were terrified from those who were just entertained. So, what do you think it was? Was it how much education someone had, or where they lived? Maybe some people are just more anxious? Nope. The answer was actually way simpler than any of that, and it had everything to do with what was playing on the other radio channels that night.
So here's the answer. It all came down to timing. Check out this data. The most popular show on the radio that night was a comedy show with a really famous ventriloquist. So what happened? Well, when that show took its first commercial break, millions of people did what we all do. They started flipping through the channels. And a whole bunch of them landed on the War of the Worlds broadcast after the introduction. The part that said, hey, this is a play. They tuned in right when things were starting to get crazy, and as you can see, a huge majority of them thought it was real news.
Okay, so tuning in late was the key. But why? Why was that so important? It turns out missing those first few sentences wasn't just about missing a piece of information. It was about missing the entire framework, the entire context you needed to make sense of everything that came next.
So, Cantril's study calls this your standard of judgment. It's a fancy term, but think of it like this. It's the mental box you put something in to understand it. Is this news? Is this entertainment? Is this an ad? We do this automatically with everything we see and hear. And the broadcast was specifically designed to mess with which box you chose.
And here's how that played out. Look at the two columns. If you heard the intro, you were using a dramatic listening standard. You knew it was a play, you could admire the acting, you were experiencing excitement. But if you missed that intro, you were dropped right into what sounded like a breaking news catastrophe.
You automatically applied a news listening standard, and from that moment on, every single realistic detail just hammered home the idea that this was real, this was terrifying, and this was happening right now.
So you might be thinking, okay, interesting story, but that was 1938. Well, this isn't just some dusty piece of history. What Cantril figured out about how we process information, and how easily that process can be hijacked, is, honestly, more relevant today than ever before.
You see, Cantril wasn't just trying to document what happened. He was trying to give people a lesson in critical thinking. His hope was that if we could understand how the form of information, how it's presented to us, can trick our brains, maybe we could build up a little resistance and not fall for the same kind of thing again.
Because at the end of the day, War of the Worlds is this perfect, timeless reminder that the context we get our information in, the frame around the picture, is just as important as the picture itself. Which leaves us with a really critical question, doesn't it? In our world of deepfakes, algorithms, and viral news, are our own standards of judgment really any stronger than they were way back in 1938?